For thousands of years, humans have had a relationship with the cannabis plant. It has been used as medicine, as fiber for clothing and rope, as a spiritual aid, and as a traded commodity that traveled along ancient trade routes. But in the modern era, marijuana has taken on a far more complicated identity. It is at the center of public health debates, cultural shifts, criminal justice policy, and a global industry measured in billions of dollars. I am not here just to repeat headlines or recite cherry-picked statistics. What I want to do is walk you through what actually happens inside the body and inside society when marijuana becomes part of the picture. We will follow what happens from the moment cannabinoids enter the bloodstream, to how they interact with the brain's reward systems, to how repeated use can shape behavior, perception, and sometimes health outcomes. Before we begin, this video is an educational and analytical discussion of neurobiology, sociology, and public policy. It is based on analysis of publicly available scientific research and reporting. It does not promote the use of any illegal substance. I am not offering medical or treatment advice here. If you or someone you know is struggling, please seek help from a qualified professional. Our goal here is understanding, not promotion, and not fear-mongering. Marijuana's journey through the human body and through modern culture is one of the most complicated stories we can tell. It involves neuroscience, policy, economics, and personal experience, all at once. Today, I want to walk through that story as honestly as possible. Not to tell you what to think, but to help you understand what actually happens. You've heard the theory 1,000 times. You've seen it in after-school specials and political speeches. But what if one of the most deeply held beliefs about drugs, the idea of a simple linear gateway, is fundamentally misunderstanding how our brains and our societies actually work? So, let's establish the landscape. We're talking about two substances that occupy wildly different spaces in our cultural imagination, yet are often rhetorically linked. On one side, cannabis, a plant with ancient historical use, containing compounds like THC and CBD that interact with a built-in network in our bodies called the endocannabinoid system. Its legal status is shifting globally, mired in a century of political and racial history. On the other side, heroin, a semi-synthetic opioid derived from morphine, which comes from the opium poppy. It has no approved medical use in places like the United States and is classified as a Schedule I drug, defined by its high potential for abuse. Its story is one of unrelenting crisis. Major health institutions like the National Institute on Drug Abuse describe it as an illegal, very addictive opioid drug. The common thread: they're both psychoactive. They both change your conscious experience. And for decades, one has been presented as the inevitable stepping stone to the other. But when you start to look at the mechanics, not the mythology, the picture gets complicated and frankly more interesting. Now, before we continue pulling apart this complex issue, I want to take a quick pause to talk about something completely different that's made a genuine difference in my own routine. Like a lot of you, my schedule can get hectic, and finding the time and energy to prepare nutritious meals isn't always easy. That's where my sponsor for this video, Mom's Meals, comes in. Mom's Meals delivers chef-prepared, ready-to-eat meals right to your door. What I really appreciate is the range of options designed for specific nutritional needs. Whether you're looking for keto-friendly meals, diabetic-friendly, low-carb, low-cholesterol, halal, vegetarian meals, and so much more, they have you covered. It's all about convenience without compromising on nutrition. For anyone with a busy schedule, a family to feed, or specific dietary goals, it's a service that just makes sense. Prices start from just $7.99 per meal. I'll put the link in the description. And you can get 50% off your first order if you want to try it. It's one less thing to think about in a busy week. All right, back to the analysis. Let's move from the basic what to the crucial how and why. This is where we have to get our hands dirty with neuroscience and sociology. Because to understand the difference between these substances, you have to understand what they're actually doing behind the scenes. Think of your brain not as a single entity, but as a city with different neighborhoods, each with its own language. Cannabis and heroin are speaking entirely different dialects to different parts of town. Cannabis compounds, primarily THC, engage with the endocannabinoid system. Think of this as a local regulatory network. It's involved in fine-tuning mood, memory, appetite, pain sensation. When THC comes in, it's like a guest speaker at a town hall meeting in a specific district. It influences the conversation, can cause a stir, euphoria, altered perception, and then it leaves. The city's core infrastructure, its power grid, its water supply, remains largely untouched. Heroin is a different story. It doesn't just influence a local system, it hijacks one of the brain's most fundamental and ancient communication protocols, the opioid receptor system. These receptors, especially the mu-opioid receptors, are part of our core survival circuitry. They manage pain, but they're also hardwired into the brain's primary reward pathway, the mesolimbic pathway. Here's the critical sequence, supported by research from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. When heroin hits the brain, it converts to morphine and binds to those mu-opioid receptors. This triggers a massive artificial surge of dopamine in a region called the nucleus accumbens, the brain's central reward hub. This is the rush, but it's not just a flood of good feelings, it's the brain receiving a signal of supreme life-critical importance. Written in a chemical language, it is evolutionarily primed to obey. This is the first major fork in the road. One substance, cannabis, modulates a peripheral regulatory system. The other, heroin, impersonates a key signal in the brain's core command and control center for survival and reward. The potential for system-wide disruption is on a completely different scale from the very first interaction. This brings us to the concept of neuroadaptation, the brain's attempt to create balance in the face of chronic disruption. Both substances can lead to tolerance, but the nature and consequences of that adaptation are worlds apart. With regular cannabis use, tolerance largely involves the downregulation of cannabinoid receptors. The local town hall becomes less sensitive to the guest speaker. The effects diminish. For most users, cessation might lead to irritability, sleep difficulty, a dependence that, while real and uncomfortable for some, is typically short-lived. Heroin's neuroadaptation is a systemic war. The brain, bombarded by this fake survival signal, fights back aggressively. To counter the constant suppression from heroin, neurons in a region called the locus coeruleus, which regulates arousal, alertness, and basic autonomic functions, ramp up their activity. The brain creates a new, heroin-dependent normal. Now, here's where the terrifying logic of addiction takes over. When heroin is removed, that compensatory hyperactivity is left unchecked. The result is the torrent of noradrenaline that manifests as acute withdrawal, the restlessness, the muscle cramps, the anxiety, the diarrhea. This isn't just craving a pleasure. It's the brain's core regulatory system screaming in dysfunction because a chemical they have physically restructured around has vanished. Scientists call this the change set point model. The brain's baseline for normal pleasure, dopamine, and normal stress, noradrenaline, is permanently altered. The addicted brain isn't seeking a high. In many ways, it's seeking relief from the punishing state of withdrawal and the inability to feel pleasure from anything else. The drug is no longer the destination. It's the only available exit from a prison the brain has built for itself. This is a central reason why heroin use disorder is characterized as a chronic relapsing disease, where seeking and using the drug becomes a primary purpose in life. So, with such different biological mechanisms, how did the gateway theory become so entrenched? This is where we must shift from neuroscience to sociology and psychology. The gateway theory is less a law of pharmacology and more a story we tell about cause and correlation. Let's engage with a counter-argument head-on. The most compelling point for the gateway theory is sequence. Many people who develop heroin use disorders did in fact use cannabis or alcohol earlier. The sequence is real, but correlation is not causation. Does the cannabis cause the heroin use? Or are both behaviors symptoms of a deeper underlying vulnerability? The research increasingly points to the latter. A major study published in the journal Translational Psychiatry provided a stunning biological insight. Chronic heroin abuse appears to be associated with accelerated biological aging at a cellular level, marked by significantly reduced telomerase activity and impacted brain structure. This isn't just drug use. This is a profound physiological disruption. The question becomes, what drives an individual toward a substance that can cause such profound harm? The evidence suggests the true gateways are far more likely to be trauma, untreated mental illness, chronic stress, and social environmental factors like poverty and lack of opportunity. These are the conditions that create a brain and a life primed for seeking escape or relief at any cost. In this light, cannabis or alcohol might be the first available tool for self-medication in a vulnerable individual's journey, not the engine driving the train. Furthermore, policy based on the simplistic gateway model has had demonstrably counterproductive effects. By lumping cannabis with heroin in a legal and cultural framework of illegal drugs, we've arguably created the very social linkages the theory warns against. We've forced their distribution into the same underground markets, exposing experimental users to a universe of harder substances they might never have encountered in a regulated environment. The policy designed to prevent the gateway may have inadvertently built its hallway. When you follow this analysis to its logical conclusions, the implications ripple out far beyond individual biology. Treating cannabis and heroin as comparable threats under the law is a category error with massive human costs. It has led to the diversion of immense law enforcement resources toward cannabis offenses, while communities devastated by opioids often need more public health infrastructure, not more policing. It has created a staggering burden of incarceration for non-violent drug offenses, disproportionately affecting minority communities while doing little to curb the supply or demand for the most dangerous substances. If all drug use is framed as a moral failing or a criminal choice, it becomes incredibly difficult to treat substance use disorders as the complex public health crises they are. The language of gateways and just say no personalizes a societal problem. It tells someone with a heroin use disorder, you made a series of bad choices, rather than understanding they may be suffering from a chronic brain disease that altered their neurobiology, potentially accelerated their cellular aging, and was likely fueled by deeper psychosocial wounds. Stigma is the enemy of recovery. A worldview obsessed with prohibition and gateways often sidelines pragmatic, evidence-based solutions. For opioids, we have powerful tools. Medications like methadone and buprenorphine that stabilize brain function and reduce fatal overdoses, and naloxone, which can reverse an overdose. Yet access to these is often limited by the same stigma. Conversely, the focus on cannabis as a dangerous gateway has for decades stifled rigorous research into its potential therapeutic applications and its actual risk profile, leaving public debate to swing between extremes of fear and hype. So, where does this leave us? My assessment after piecing this together is that we are at an intellectual crossroads. We can cling to the simple, linear story of the gateway, a story that is politically useful but scientifically and socially inadequate. Or we can embrace a more nuanced, difficult, and ultimately more humane model. The question for the coming decade is not, is cannabis a gateway drug? The more productive and harder questions are, how do we build a society with fewer people desperate to escape through chemicals? And how do we design a public health response that meets each substance and each person with the specific tools they need? It means having the courage to say that the war on drugs, built on this flawed gateway premise, has largely been a war on people, and it has failed. The way forward is messy, complex, and requires letting go of old certainties. But it's the only path that leads to a reality-based solution. If you found this deep dive into the science and sociology of a heated debate valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. These topics are complex, and breaking them down takes time. Your support makes it possible. Let me know your thoughts on this framework in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.